Twilight, The Hunger Games, Percy Jackson, The Last Airbender. Long ago, the four nations lived in harmony, until one day, an inexplicable amount of Gen Z nostalgia attacked. Or at least it was inexplicable. Until now. Because I'm going to explain it. I've been thinking about this phenomenon for months, ever since I first started seeing like memes and posts and stuff about the Hunger Games Renaissance. And with the recent release of the first 2 episodes of the new Percy Jackson TV show, I saw the pattern cement itself and I was hooked. I started my research that very moment and did not stop until I found my grand theory of 2010s YA nostalgia. If you are enjoying this video, I would love to ask you to like and subscribe to my tiny baby channel. It recently just turned 1 year old and I'm very proud of it. I probably don't have to tell you that several beloved 2010s franchises are getting new additions recently and in the future. Probably the biggest one is the new movie adaptation of the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which is a Hunger Games prequel, but there is also the aforementioned Disney Plus video series TV show thing for Percy Jackson, and there's a new live action Avatar: The Last Airbender TV series that's being produced by Netflix that's supposed to come out in 2024. Side note, I will probably during this video refer to any of the above franchises as YA, even though I know technically they're not all YA. First of all, that's used usually for books, and also that's technically for teenagers. And a lot of these things were originally meant for kids, like Avatar: The Last Airbender and Percy Jackson, but I think they had really similar demographics, and kids and teenagers both liked all of these things, and also, quite frankly, they fall into a major demographic, which is me, from the ages of 10 to like 15. For reference, here is a timeline of the main works in these series. So during the past several years, there's been a huge resurgence and interest in these already very popular, but still a little old works. In particular, The Hunger Games has gotten so popular again that they've been calling it a renaissance over on TikTok. There have been memes, skits, even sometimes thoughtful discussion, maybe less so on that last one, but still. However, the timing is a little bit suspicious. The Hunger Games Renaissance in particular started in March of 2023, 7 months before the adaptation of the prequel came out in November. Interesting. That was convenient that it just suddenly got popular again half a year before this movie was supposed to come out, and it made people wonder, was this interest, this nostalgia, this seemingly organic nostalgia, an actuality manufactured by these film production companies or by whoever owns the franchise currently? And there's even a little bit of proof of this. In fact, in March, Lionsgate, who owns The Hunger Games, put all of the old Hunger Games movies on Netflix, and they even admitted to it. But what we are also doing separate from Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes to bring The Hunger Games back is to line up all of the original movies on Netflix. However, it's never that simple. And also, I'm not actually a conspiracy theorist. I think that conspiracy theories are unlikely because they require too many people not talking about something that people love to do. But in any case, if we're going to discuss this conspiracy theory, we have to talk about the elephant in the room. Oh my god, why is the elephant covered in blood? Why is that elephant, why is he covered in, get the elephant out of here. Sorry. Sorry about that. Anyways, the Twilight Renaissance was jump-started in 2018 by the most iconic Tumblr post, potentially of all time, but certainly about Twilight, the effervescent post. Bella was lucky she didn't have a cell phone of any kind, because you know your boy Edward would be blowing up that phone 24/7 going, "Saw a snail today, effervescent," or some shit equivalent. I will give you that it didn't really jump off of Tumblr until a little bit later in 2020 with the release of Midnight Sun, which was like Twilight from Edward's perspective or whatever. But that was well before the Twilight movies went onto Netflix in 2021. Also, honestly, okay, speaking honestly, the same thing applies for both Twilight and The Hunger Games. There was no way to predict that actions like releasing a new novel in the series or putting the movies on Netflix would jumpstart this insane resurgence in popularity. there is just like no way that you could have predicted that. I think the simpler answer for why these franchises actually like were revisited is because franchises are such a safe bet. In fact, many media companies are choosing to make movies and franchises rather than taking a risk on a new original work. That's why we have so many god-awful Marvel movies. Hi, I'm Boring Stupid Man, the worst superhero you've ever seen. And I'm Woman, his love interest. Because the writers are trying to be feminist, they accidentally wrote me as way cooler than him. So now it seems dumb that the movie is about him. I would say that they completely failed feminism by failing to write me as a person, but luckily, no one in a Marvel movie is a person, regardless of gender. So we've established that this is mostly organic nostalgia, and in my personal experience, I would say it's mostly from people in their early to mid-20s with some people in their late teens, but either way, it's a pretty solidly Gen Z demographic. And it's not just YA or other media from this time period. Things like the 2014 Tumblr girl style have also supposedly come back around into fashion again, which personally I would be all for that because that's the way that I wanted to dress before I had enough money to buy my own clothes. Unfortunately, now that I do buy my own clothes, I only dress like a weird lumberjack, a child from Stranger Things, or a film noir detective. So the next question is then, is this nostalgia weird? Or unusual, maybe, would be the better word. People tend to theorize that both nostalgia and fashion run on 20-year cycles. And a lot of people right now love to claim that these fashion nostalgia trend cycles have sped up even exponentially due to social media, in particular TikTok, how fast-paced it is, its glorification of hyperconsumption, etc., etc. In my personal opinion, it doesn't really seem to me to be completely legit, just because like I don't think that the micro trends people see on TikTok are necessarily translating to like actual major changes in their personal style. But what do I know? I am clearly not a big fashion girly here, but I do know a little bit about pop culture. That's kind of the whole point of what we're doing here, actually. And I would say that this Gen Z nostalgia for these media properties is actually not that weird, because it is very in line with exactly what millennials did at this age. People, in fact, have often defined millennials as the nostalgia generation. Millennials tended to be, in their 20s, very nostalgic for things of their youth. And that is that, like, 90s kid phenomenon, like, only 90s kids remember this. 20 million BuzzFeed articles about things that happened in the 90s. That was millennials in their 20s being nostalgic for their youths. And so, like, this is exactly in line with that. People in their 20s being nostalgic for their youths. It's just a younger generation. People often link millennials focus on nostalgia with the trauma of living through 9/11. And if you wanted to, you could then draw a like very major comparison between like 9/11 trauma and like COVID trauma. And you know, there's some legitimacy to that potentially. Like a lot of this nostalgia stuff started in 2020 and a little bit after 2020, these last couple of years. And even the one that started beforehand, which was Twilight, didn't really take off until 2020. And also you could argue that before 2020, that appreciation tended to be a little more ironic before converting into a more earnest appreciation and love of the series in 2020. While I think there's some validity to that, I'm a little cautious of going, oh my god, it's trauma about everything. I just think that's like a little overused at this point, and I think the actual explanation could just be maybe a little bit simpler. I think it might just be long enough that people are sort of shucking off the residual embarrassment from their past interests. When you're in your 20s, you don't really feel as embarrassed by stuff that you liked when you were a child and young teenager because it's like you're far enough removed that it's not like anyone's going to look at you reminiscing on your youth and be like, haha, you still like things that are for babies, because there's just too long of a span of time in there for that to really be a valid critique. At this point, I would say everything old and cringe is new again, except for Divergent, because everyone hates that now, but that's like a whole other video. But I mean, like, people on Tumblr have gotten into Homestuck again, which has potentially been dubbed the cringest media property of all time. Not by me, but like by other people. Personally, I was never a Homestuck fan, but I am waiting with bated breath for the Netflix live action adaptation starring Timothée Chalamet and Kiernan Shipka. I think it's mostly fine and pretty normal and not bad, really. And I think that media companies are just realizing the trend rather than creating it themselves. They realize that everyone is kind of nostalgic for these somewhat older, but not that old movie book franchises. And so they're trying to capitalize on that interest because that's what they do. Now, whether these new adaptations are actually any good is a whole other story. Either way, I think it's cool to see people revisiting these media properties from their youth with fresh eyes. Also, did you know that they made a Hunger Games makeup line, like inspired by the Capitol several years ago? Can you imagine like something that better illustrates the entire point of what those books were trying to critique? Maybe the Hanging Tree remix, actually, maybe that shows that better. In any case, I think that nostalgia is fine and it can in fact be a healthy coping mechanism, and I think it can lead to some interesting art. Everything is inspired by something else that came before it. As long as people don't get so caught up in nostalgia that they can't actually appreciate anything new, but I'm sure that would never happen.